Some high tension in Hong Kong appears to be easing up this morning, but the standoff at a city university between police and student protesters still has potential for violence. We can confirm this morning that some of the people involved in the demonstrations are in fact Canadians, and we'll have more on them in just a few minutes. But we're going to begin the hour with what could be the end of the siege. Protesters handing themselves in and over to Hong Kong police. This is the latest video into us this morning. A number of students crossing the police line and allowing police to take them in. But dozens more remain inside the campus blockade. The leader of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, said in her first comments of late that she's looking for a peaceful end to the occupation, but she does not rule out more confrontations between protesters and police.
The reason I cannot give you an absolute guarantee is because the situation is changing. For argument's sake, if we were suddenly seeing some very major, life-threatening incidents on the campus, then, as I said, the police are on the reactive side. Then the police have to take the necessary action to prevent any tragedies from happening in Hong Kong.
So again, there, Carrie Lam, her first comments on what we have seen on university campuses in the past few days. Let's begin our coverage with freelance reporter Grace Lee in Hong Kong. She is, in fact, at the Polytechnic University. This has been really the focal point where the violence has gone on for days. It is, in fact, the lone university, which is the standout. So, Grace, let's begin with the latest happening there right now.
Yeah, well, like you said, just outside the university, we just saw an ambulance pass by as well. But we've been here for a couple of hours and we've seen about 20 or so protesters coming out, surrendering to police. And the scene has been pretty heartbreaking. A lot of them are very young, and one or two protesters have been shouting out their names, their social security numbers, and their parents' contact information, also shouting that they have no intention to commit suicide, insinuating that if something were to happen to them, it's not by their own hand. So definitely these protesters that are coming out right now are coming out defeated. And for the few that are left in there, it might be about 50 or so left, but they're running out of food, they're running out of water, and they don't have a lot of options at this point. So tonight might be the night that we see the siege come to an end.
We've been hearing about the students who have been leaving the campus, turning themselves into police, Grace, but we've also heard about some dramatic scenes as students try to escape the police cordon. Tell us about that part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Students here and the protesters have been trying some pretty incredible maneuvers, including scaling very big walls and trying to jump over bridges to get to motorcycles waiting for them. We saw a video of that happening last night, but it seems some of those protesters might have been arrested as well. Today, the latest was that some of the protesters were thinking about going through the sewage system to try and escape the police siege here, which, of course, firefighters have said is absolutely dangerous. They would be risking their lives. Luckily, so far, it doesn't seem that any protesters have attempted that, but it just signals how desperate they are to try and get out of this situation. And the stakes are very high. They're facing about 10 years jail time if they're caught for rioting charges. And, that's not an option that they want to take, especially seeing that some of these protesters are just so young.
Grace, can I ask you as well, of course, everyone, as you've just said yourself, could be at the end of the siege, but there is still a lot of concern. There are still concerns about what might happen and, again, what the central government might do. We heard from China's ambassador to Britain warning that the central government would not sit on its hands and watch. At this point, as we begin our program this morning and nighttime there, I mean, what's the latest that we're hearing from Beijing itself on the university situation?
Well, Beijing has been very clear. They're expecting the government and Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, to solve this situation right now. And as I'm saying this, we're hearing a lot of police activity and ambulances coming through here. But the time is ticking for Hong Kong's government to solve this situation. It really doesn't look good for them. But we're also seeing Beijing interfering a lot more closely to Hong Kong's business matters, and especially hearing that Beijing has said that Hong Kong's High Court saying that Hong Kong's ban on masks was unconstitutional, them saying that that isn't, in line with what Beijing wants. That's also a signal to these protesters that Beijing's hand is coming over them. And that's very frightening for these protesters. They're fighting for democracy. They're fighting for a chance to have a free election. And it just seems like those chances are getting further and further away for them.
Okay, Grace, thank you very much. Right there in position. We'll be back to you through the morning, through the evening there as events change, as developments come in. Thank you for beginning our coverage, though, in Hong Kong with freelance reporter Grace Lee. Now, let's come back to another part of the story. Confirmation coming late last night that Canadians are, in fact, involved in those demonstrations, involved on those university campuses. And Michael has that part of the story.
Well, good morning, Heather. And certainly many people are watching what's happening in Hong Kong, in this country, among them Global Affairs. And it is from Global Affairs that we are now told there are some 300,000 Canadian citizens in Hong Kong. And when CBC News asked Global Affairs directly, are any of the protesters Canadian? Well, take a look at the statement that we got from Global Affairs. They say the following: the Government of Canada is closely monitoring the situation at Hong Kong Polytechnic University in light of recent demonstrations and violence. Global Affairs is aware of Canadians affected, and we are in contact with local authorities. So underline that point, aware of Canadians affected. Now, we don't know if that means Canadians have been injured or arrested, but it does give us a sense that these protests are hitting close for many people in this country. And we have to point out that while the focus has been on the Polytechnic University in recent days, several other students and protesters throughout the city are also staging their own demonstrations, united in their demands that Beijing respect what is called the one country, two systems principle that is meant to govern Hong Kong. And we heard it from the protesters. These demonstrations are about the future of Hong Kong, which is why Hong Kong students here in Canada say despite the destruction, despite the disruptions, they believe the majority of people in the city support the demonstrations. Take a listen.
This is an incredibly important turning point, and it's very important that everyone keeps fighting and supporting the cause.
This is exceeding all of our expectations. There is violence conducted by certain protesters that I do condemn, but that does not mean I will disregard the entire movement. I think things like freedom and democracy are always worth fighting for.
Still, despite that resolve, China watchers are very concerned. This is something that has never been seen before in the once British territory. And so many China watchers are worried that all of this could go sideways very quickly. Take a listen to Leo Shin from the University of British Columbia.
We are fearful for the worst. It is deeply worrisome because no one can see where this is going. What we can all agree on is that it is on the part of the government. I mean, the government has the most power and ability to de-escalate the tensions in Hong Kong. And so far, we are not seeing signs that the government is willing to do that.
And not surprisingly, then, Ottawa is calling for calm in Hong Kong, calling on Beijing to exercise restraint here. Again, the words they say, they are aware of Canadians affected. We are still trying to work on what that actually means in terms of numbers, whether or not Canadians were protesters that have been arrested or injured. That is something that we'll be tracking throughout the day. But again, underlining how the violence in Hong Kong is hitting close to home for many people in this country.
You're going to be watching all of that for us, Michael, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Michael Serapio.